The vast, ancient forest was a place of deep shadows and whispered secrets, especially on a night like this. The moon, a pale and helpless sliver, was completely swallowed by the churning ink-black clouds that had gathered over the treetops. A bitter wind howled, not like a wolf, but like a tormented ghost, tearing at the branches of the pines and making them groan and sway. Rain did not simply fall, it was hurled from the sky in great stinging sheets, turning the narrow animal paths into rushing streams of mud. It was a night for sensible creatures to be safe in their dens, curled up and waiting for the fury to pass. In the very heart of this chaos, nestled in a small clearing, was a cabin. It was a sturdy little structure of weathered logs, with a single window that glowed with a warm, golden light. Inside, the world was a different place. The roar of the storm became a distant, muffled rumble, beaten back by the thick walls. The air was filled with the sweet, smoky scent of burning pine logs crackling in a large stone fireplace. The flames danced and leaped, casting flickering, friendly shadows that played across the room, illuminating shelves filled with books, bunches of drying herbs and simple handmade furniture. Cora sat in a worn but comfortable armchair, a thick woolen blanket wrapped around her legs. In her hands was a book, its pages soft with age. She was a young woman with a quiet face and gentle eyes, the color of the forest floor after a rain. Her life here was a solitary one by choice. She was an Omega, which meant her nature was peaceful and calm. The loud, aggressive world of the werewolf packs that roamed the deeper parts of the woods held no appeal for her. Here, in her sanctuary, she was content with the company of her own thoughts and the gentle sounds of the fire. She tried to focus on the words in her book, a tale of adventure in far-off lands, but the storm was a persistent distraction. Another tremendous crack of thunder shook the very foundations of the cabin, making her jump. She sighed, marking her page with a ribbon and setting the book aside. Just as she was about to stand up and make a cup of tea, a sound cut through the noise of the wind and rain. It wasn't thunder. It was something else. Something close. It was a thud. A soft, heavy thud against the bottom of her heavy wooden door. Cora froze, her heart suddenly beating a little faster. No one came out this deep into the woods, especially not on a night like this. It could be a branch torn loose by the gale. She held her breath, listening intently. For a long moment there was only the storm. Then it came again. A little louder this time. Asterisk thump. Scrape, asterisk. It was alive. A flutter of fear tickled her throat. Her Omega instincts whispered for her to stay hidden, to be silent and still until the danger passed. But a stronger instinct, one of deep compassion, stirred within her. What if someone was hurt? What if a creature was suffering out in that freezing deluge? She couldn't just ignore it. Slowly, cautiously, she untangled herself from the blanket and crept towards the door. The floorboards were cool beneath her bare feet. She stood on her tiptoes to peer through the small, frost-tinged peephole, but all she could see was a wall of impenetrable darkness and the blur of rain. Taking a deep, shaky breath, she slid back the heavy iron bolt. It made a loud, grating sound that seemed to echo in the cozy room. She turned the knob and pulled the door open, just a crack, the wind immediately snatching at it and trying to pull it wider. There, lying half in the mud and half on her rough-hewn doorstep, was a wolf. But it was like no wolf she had ever seen or imagined. It was enormous, its body long and powerful even in its current state of collapse. Its fur was a magnificent tapestry of silver and charcoal gray, now matted and plastered to its body with rain and mud. As a flash of lightning lit up the clearing, she could see the rise and fall of its ribs, too quick and shallow. And then she saw the wounds. Deep, angry claw marks scored its flank and a dark, ominous stain was spreading through the fur on its shoulder. Fear shot through Cora like an electric shock. This was a predator, a creature of immense strength and danger. Her every sense screamed at her to slam the door shut. But then the wolf lifted its head. Its eyes met hers. They were not the savage, yellow eyes of a wild beast. They were a startling, intelligent shade of amber, and in them she saw not a threat, but a profound and desperate exhaustion. A silent plea. It was a look that spoke of immense pain and a last, fading hope. The wolf let out a sound that was barely more than a whimper, a puff of steam in the frigid air, and its head dropped back into the mud as if the effort to hold it up was too much. In that moment, all of Cora's fear melted away, replaced by a surge of protective tenderness. This magnificent creature was dying on her doorstep. She couldn't turn it away. Pushing the door open fully against the wind, she knelt down, ignoring the cold rain that instantly soaked her clothes and hair. "Shoo," she whispered, her voice soft and steady. "It's all right. You're safe now." She reached out a trembling hand, not to touch its head, but to gently lay her fingers on its massive shoulder, away from the injuries. The wolf flinched at the contact, a tremor running through its powerful muscles, but it did not growl. It did not snap. It simply watched her with those weary, knowing eyes. "Come on," she coaxed. "You can't stay out here. You have to come inside." Getting the huge, injured animal into the cabin was a struggle. It was far too heavy for her to carry. She had to coax and pull, and the wolf, understanding her intent, tried to help, dragging itself forward with a heartbreaking show of willpower, its claws scraping on the wooden floor. Finally, with one last heave, it was fully inside, collapsing onto the thick rug before the fireplace, leaving a trail of mud and water. Cora quickly shut the door, locking out the storm, and turned to face her unexpected guest. The wolf lay panting on the rug, steam rising from its wet fur in the warmth of the fire. The golden light illuminated the severity of its wounds more clearly now. They were bad. Very bad. She moved quickly, gathering clean cloths, a bowl of warm water, and a jar of healing salve she made from forest herbs. She knelt beside the wolf again, speaking to it in a low, soothing murmur as she worked. "This might sting a little," she said, dabbing gently at the claw marks. The wolf stiffened but remained still, its amber eyes fixed on her face as she cleaned away the mud and blood. She was amazed by its stillness, its tolerance. It was as if it knew she was trying to help. Once the wounds were clean and smeared with the sweet-smelling salve, she sat back on her heels. The wolf sighed, a deep, shuddering sigh that seemed to come from its very soul, and rested its great head on its paws, its eyes slowly closing. The tension drained from its body, replaced by the deep, rhythmic breathing of exhausted sleep. Cora pulled her blanket from the chair and draped it over the sleeping animal. She sat in her armchair watching over him. The storm outside was finally beginning to quiet, its rage spent. In the quiet cabin, the only sounds were the crackle of the fire and the deep, steady breathing of the silver wolf. She didn't know who he was or where he came from. She only knew that he needed her, and for tonight, that was enough. She had saved him from the storm, and a strange, quiet feeling settled in her heart, a feeling that her lonely life had just changed forever. The first light of dawn was a pale, hesitant gray seeping through the single window of the cabin, stripping the room of the firelit magic it had held during the night. The storm had grumbled its way eastward, leaving behind a world washed clean and dripping softly. Inside, the air was warm and carried the mingled scents of wood smoke, drying herbs, and the distinct, wild odor of wet wolf. Cora awoke with a stiff neck, curled awkwardly in her armchair. For a moment, she was disoriented, the memory of the chaotic night flooding back to her in a rush. Her eyes immediately went to the rug before the fireplace. He was still there. The massive wolf lay exactly where he had collapsed, a great silver-gray mound beneath her knitted blanket. The rise and fall of his breathing was deeper, more regular now, a sign that the rest and her simple ministrations had done some good. She watched him sleep, a strange sense of peace settling over her. The fear that should have been there, the natural caution of an Omega alone with a powerful, unknown creature, was curiously absent. It had been replaced by a protective tenderness that felt as natural as breathing. She moved as quietly as she could, stoking the embers of the fire and adding a new log. The small sounds of her movement caused the wolf's ears to twitch, but he did not wake. She set a kettle of water to heat for tea and began to quietly tidy the trail of mud he had dragged in, her movements slow and deliberate so as not to disturb him. The cabin, once a place of solitary routine, now felt different. It felt occupied. It felt shared. It was mid-morning when he finally stirred. Cora was reading again, but this time her attention was not on the page. She saw the blanket shift, saw the great head lift. Those amber eyes opened, and they were clearer now, more focused. They found her immediately, and for a long, silent moment, they just looked at each other. There was no aggression in his gaze, only a deep, watchful intelligence that sent a small shiver down her spine. This was no ordinary animal. "Good morning," she said softly, her voice seeming too loud in the quiet room. The wolf's tail gave a single soft thump against the rug. It wasn't a wag, not like a dog's. It was more like a deliberate, acknowledging tap. A response. This became the pattern of their first full day together. Cora would speak and the wolf would listen. She found herself talking to him more than she had talked to anyone in months. She told him about her life, how she had chosen this cabin for its solitude and its peace, far from the complicated hierarchies and constant tension of the werewolf packs. "I'm an Omega, you see," she explained as she sorted her herbs. "I don't really fit in with all the posturing and the fights for dominance. I just like the quiet." The wolf watched her, his head cocked as if he understood every word. She told him about the forest, pointing out the different plants through the window and what they were used for. She told him about the family of foxes that lived near the creek and the owl that hooted from the old oak tree at dusk. He was a silent, attentive companion, his presence a comforting weight in the room. When she moved from one task to another, his eyes would follow her. When she offered him a bowl of water, he drank delicately, then nudged the bowl back toward her with his nose in a gesture that felt like a thank you. She decided to call him Storm for the night he had arrived. "It suits you," she said, and he seemed to accept the name, his ears pricking up slightly when she used it. As the second day turned into evening, a new routine began. Cora had made a simple broth from dried meat and vegetables. After she had eaten her portion, she placed the pot on the floor near the rug. "It's not much," she said, "but it might help you get your strength back." Storm hesitated for only a moment before eating, his movements still slow and careful, mindful of his injuries. After he was done, he settled back down, but he didn't sleep. He simply watched the fire, and Cora felt a profound sense of companionship she hadn't known she was missing. That night, Cora slept in her small bed for the first time since his arrival, feeling secure enough to leave her post in the chair. She fell into a deep, dreamless sleep, soothed by the sound of his steady breathing from the other side of the room. It was a sound that woke her. A soft groan, a rustle of movement that was different from the shifting of a large animal. She opened her eyes. The fire had burned down to a bed of glowing coals, casting the room in a deep, pulsating red light. The shape on the rug was not the shape of a wolf. Her breath caught in her throat. Lying where Storm had been was a man. A tall, powerfully built man with dark hair, his skin pale in the dim light. He was shirtless, and even in the shadows she could see the angry red lines of the claw marks scoring his side. He was asleep, his face turned toward the fire, and in the strong line of his jaw and the breadth of his shoulders, Cora saw not just a man but a leader. This was no lost wanderer. This was an alpha. Her heart hammered against her ribs, a frantic drumbeat of shock and fear. But as she watched him sleep, the fear slowly ebbed away, replaced by a dawning understanding. The intelligence in the wolf's eyes, the stillness, the quiet dignity, it all made sense now. He was a shifter. He had trusted her enough to heal in her home, and now, in his deepest sleep, his true form was revealed. Quietly, so quietly she barely made a sound, Cora slipped out of bed. She took the spare blanket from her own chest and crept across the room. The man on the floor shivered slightly in the cool air. She knelt beside him, her movements as gentle as they had been with the wolf, and draped the blanket over his broad shoulders. He stirred, a faint sigh escaping his lips, but he did not wake. In that moment, any last trace of fear vanished, replaced by the same protective tenderness she had felt from the beginning. She returned to her bed and lay awake until the first light of dawn, watching over the sleeping alpha, the keeper of a secret he didn't yet know she possessed. The red glow of the coals faded slowly, giving way to the cool, gray light of pre-dawn. Cora did not sleep again. She lay perfectly still in her bed, watching the man-shaped shadow on her rug. Her mind was a whirlwind of thoughts, each one crashing into the next. An alpha. She had given shelter to an alpha. The very kind of werewolf she had purposely built her life to avoid, with their fierce pride and complicated battles for power, was sleeping on her floor. The quiet, gentle wolf she had named Storm was, in truth, a leader of packs, a creature of command and strength. Yet, the man she saw now, vulnerable in sleep, seemed a world away from the aggressive alphas of her fears. As the room grew lighter, she could make out more details. The dark hair that fell across his forehead. The strong line of his nose. The way his hands, even in rest, looked capable and sure. The wounds on his side looked angrier on human skin, a stark reminder of the violence he had escaped. The blanket she had placed over him had slipped down, and she saw the steady, strong rhythm of his breathing. He was deeply asleep, his body healing, completely unaware that his secret was no longer a secret. A soft sound escaped his lips, not quite a word, a murmur of dreams. Cora's heart thumped once hard against her ribs. She closed her eyes, pretending to be asleep herself just in case he woke. She heard the rustle of the blanket, the sharp intake of breath that signaled a change from sleep to waking. There was a long, tense silence. She could feel his alertness filling the room, a palpable energy that had not been there before. She risked cracking open one eye just a slit. He was sitting up, the blanket pooled around his waist. He was staring at his own hands, turning them over as if seeing them for the first time. Then his head snapped up, and his gaze, those same intelligent amber eyes, now set in a human face, swept the room. It landed on her lying in the bed. She saw the shock register in his expression, followed by a flash of alarm. He looked down at his bare chest, at the wounds, then back at her. He had believed he was hidden, and now he knew he was exposed. Cora decided the kindest thing was to end the pretense. She took a slow breath, opened her eyes fully, and sat up. She made no sudden movements, keeping her hands visible and her posture relaxed. She met his gaze and held it. "You're awake," she said, her voice calm and steady, though her pulse was racing. "The fever seems to have broken." The man, the alpha, stared at her, his expression a mixture of wariness and confusion. "You," he began, his voice rough from disuse and sleep. It was a deep voice, fitting the breadth of his shoulders. "You are not afraid?" Cora shook her head slowly. "I was, last night when I first saw you. But not anymore." She gestured slightly toward the rug. "You were Storm first. And Storm was never a threat to me." He looked down at the blanket, then around the small, cozy cabin, at the herbs drying, the books on the shelf, the pot that had held the broth. Understanding dawned in his eyes. "You've been caring for me? For days." "Yes," Cora said simply. She swung her legs out of bed but remained seated on the edge, not wanting to stand over him. "My name is Cora." He was silent for a long moment, absorbing this. The tension in his shoulders eased slightly. "I am Rylan," he said finally. The name held a weight to it, a sense of importance. He looked at her, his gaze direct and honest. "I am the Alpha of the Shadow Ridge Pack. I owe you my life." The formal declaration hung in the air between them. An Alpha was thanking an Omega. In the world they came from, this was not a common thing. "What happened to you?" Cora asked softly. Rylan's jaw tightened. He looked into the cold fireplace as if seeing the memory played out in the ashes. "A challenge," he said, the word heavy with meaning. "From a wolf named Brock. He craves power, but he does not care for the well-being of the pack. He ambushed me with his followers, not in a fair fight but like a coward. I was outnumbered. I ran not to flee but to lead them away from my people. The storm, it was a curse and a blessing. I lost them, but I nearly lost myself." He gestured to his wounds. "I don't know how I found your door. It was as if something guided me." "An Omega's home is a place of peace," Cora said quietly. "Perhaps you sensed that." Rylan looked at her with new interest. "You live here alone?" "By choice." "Yes. I prefer the quiet. The politics of the packs, it's not for me." He nodded slowly, a look of respect in his eyes. "It takes a different kind of strength to choose solitude. To build a life like this." He glanced around again, truly seeing the cabin not just as a shelter, but as her home. "Most would have been terrified to find a wolf like me on their step. You showed more courage than many of my warriors." A faint warmth touched Cora's cheeks. It was not a compliment she was used to. "I just did what felt right." Over the next few hours, a new dynamic settled between them. The silent companionship she had shared with the wolf was replaced by conversation. As Cora prepared a simple breakfast, Rylan sat at her small table, the blanket wrapped around his shoulders like a cloak. He told her more about his pack, not with boasting but with a clear and deep love for his people. He spoke of the elders, the young pups, the need for a strong but fair leader. Cora listened, fascinated. This was not the story of power she had always heard, it was a story of responsibility. In turn, she shared more about her life, her knowledge of the forest, her reasons for seeking peace. He listened with the same intense focus Storm had, but now he could ask questions and his insights were sharp and thoughtful. As the sun climbed higher, Rylan tested his strength, standing and walking slowly around the main room. He was still weak, but the healing was progressing quickly, a testament to his alpha constitution. Cora found her eyes drawn to him. He moved with a natural grace, a contained power that was impossible to ignore. When their hands brushed as she handed him a cup of tea, a simple, accidental touch, a jolt passed between them, warm and startling. Both pulled their hands back slightly and a new, different kind of silence fell, filled with something unspoken, a spark of awareness that had nothing to do with wolves or packs and everything to do with a man and a woman. The day passed in a blur of quiet talk and shared chores. The space that had felt so small with a giant wolf in it now felt strangely intimate with this man. The secret was out, and in its place, something new and delicate and incredibly warm had begun to grow, right there in the quiet of the forest cabin. The following days settled into a new and strangely comfortable rhythm within the four walls of the cabin. The initial shock of revelation had melted away, replaced by a quiet, growing understanding between Cora and Rylan. He was no longer a mysterious wolf or a startling stranger, but a person with a name, a history, and a presence that was beginning to feel deeply familiar. Rylan's strength returned with the remarkable speed of his kind. The angry claw marks on his side faded into pink, healing scars. He began to move around the cabin with more purpose, the innate authority of an alpha evident in his posture, even when he was simply helping Cora stack firewood by the door. He insisted on making himself useful, taking over tasks that required more strength, like chopping logs for the fire. Cora would watch him from the window, the powerful sure swing of the axe, the way the muscles in his back moved. A fluttery, warm feeling would start in her stomach, a feeling she tried to ignore but found herself thinking about more and more. Their conversations deepened, moving beyond the stories of their separate lives into the realm of ideas and dreams. They talked late into the night, long after the fire had burned low. Rylan spoke of his vision for his pack, a community built on loyalty and protection, not just dominance. He asked for her opinions, valuing her Omega's perspective on peace and harmony in a way no one ever had. Cora found herself opening up, sharing parts of herself she had kept locked away, and he listened, his amber eyes never leaving her face, making her feel truly seen. One afternoon, while Cora was tending to her herb garden just outside the cabin, Rylan stood in the doorway, leaning against the frame. The sun was warm on their faces. "You have a gift, Cora," he said, his voice soft. "This peace you've created here, it's a strength I've rarely known. My world is so loud. All noise and teeth and challenge. But this," he gestured to the quiet clearing, the buzzing bees, the gentle rustle of leaves. "This is a different kind of power." Cora looked up from the soil, her hands still dirty. She saw the sincerity in his face, not flattery but genuine admiration. The warm feeling in her stomach spread through her whole chest. "It's the only kind I've ever wanted," she replied. He took a step toward her, then another, until he was standing right beside her. He was so close she could feel the warmth radiating from his body, could smell the clean scent of the forest and something uniquely him, something wild and warm. He reached out, not to touch her, but to gently brush a stray lock of hair that had fallen across her cheek, tucking it carefully behind her ear. His fingers barely grazed her skin, but the touch was like a spark. Cora's breath caught. Her heart hammered against her ribs. She looked into his eyes and saw her own feelings reflected there, a mixture of wonder, hesitation, and a powerful, growing attraction. In that suspended moment, the forest around them fell utterly silent. The birds stopped singing. The breeze stilled. It was a silence that felt heavy, wrong. Rylan's head snapped up, his body instantly rigid. The softness in his eyes vanished, replaced by the sharp, focused alertness of a predator. The alpha was back. "They're here," he whispered, the words a low growl. Before Cora could even process what was happening, a rough, mocking voice sliced through the quiet from the edge of the clearing. Well, Rylan. Hiding out in an Omega's little playhouse? I expected more from the great alpha of Shadow Ridge." A man stepped out from the tree line, flanked by 4 other large, grim-faced men. He was broad and cruel-looking, with a jagged scar running down one cheek. This was Brock. His eyes swept over the cabin with contempt before landing on Rylan. "Looks like you're not quite healed up. This will be easier than I thought." Rylan moved instantly, placing his body squarely between Cora and the threat. His transformation was not visible, but Cora could feel it, a surge of power that made the air crackle. "This is between you and me, Brock," Rylan said, his voice cold and hard as iron. "Leave her out of it." Brock laughed, a harsh, ugly sound. "Why would I do that? It's so much more fun when there's an audience. And when I'm done with you, maybe my boys and I will have some fun with your little Omega pet." Rylan let out a low growl that seemed to vibrate through the very ground. The promise of violence was imminent. Cora's Omega instinct screamed at her to run, to hide, to make herself small. But seeing Rylan standing alone, ready to fight for her, something else rose up inside her. A fierce, protective courage she didn't know she possessed. She would not be the reason he got hurt. She would not be a weakness. As Brock's pack began to fan out, their attention fixed on Rylan, Cora took a slow, silent step backward, then another, melting into the shadows of the cabin. She didn't go inside. Instead, she slipped around the back, her heart pounding not just with fear, but with a clear, sharp purpose. She knew this forest in a way these aggressive wolves never would. The silence that settled over the clearing after the fight was profound and heavy, broken only by the ragged sound of Rylan's breathing. The air, which had moments before been charged with snarls and the terrible sounds of conflict, now felt still and waiting. Brock, beaten and subdued, had been dragged away by his remaining followers, their spirits broken, their threat extinguished. The forest itself seemed to be holding its breath. Rylan stood with his back to Cora for a long moment, his shoulders rising and falling with each deep breath. He was a picture of raw power, his clothes torn, the newly healed scars on his side standing out lividly against his skin. Slowly he turned. His eyes, that familiar shade of amber, found her where she stood at the edge of the trees. There was no triumph in his gaze, no arrogance from his victory. Instead, there was something far more intense, a look of overwhelming relief and a dawning, awestruck wonder. He walked toward her, his steps slow and deliberate on the soft earth. He did not stop until he was standing right before her, so close she could see the flecks of gold in his eyes, feel the heat coming from his body. He looked down at her, his expression so full of emotion it made her heart ache. "Cora," he said, and her name on his lips was a prayer, a thank you, everything all at once. His voice was rough with spent adrenaline. "What you did, your courage." He seemed to struggle for words, a rarity for an alpha. He reached out, his hands gentle as they came up to cradle her face. His touch was warm and sure, a stark contrast to the violence of moments before. "I have never known anyone like you. You didn't just save me from the storm. Today you saved me with a strength I didn't know existed. You saved my pack." Tears welled in Cora's eyes, but they were not tears of fear or sadness. They were tears of release, of a feeling so powerful it had to overflow. She leaned into his touch, her own hands coming up to rest on his wrists, feeling the strong, steady pulse beneath his skin. "I was so scared," she whispered. "But I was more scared of losing you." The admission hung in the air between them, simple and true. It broke the last barrier. Rylan's gaze dropped to her lips, then back to her eyes, a silent question asked and answered. He bent his head and he kissed her. It was not a gentle, hesitant kiss. It was a kiss born of gratitude, of awe, of a passion that had been simmering between them for days. It was a claiming and a surrender all at once. It held the wildness of the wolf and the tender promise of the man. Cora kissed him back, her arms sliding up around his neck, her fingers tangling in his dark hair. The world, the forest, the recent battle, everything faded away until there was only the two of them bound together in that single life-altering moment. When they finally parted, breathless, they rested their foreheads together. A new understanding flowed between them, silent and deep. The Omega and the Alpha were no longer separate. They were one. In the days that followed, a sense of peaceful purpose settled over the cabin. Rylan sent a message to his pack, a simple signal that he was alive and safe. The response was immediate. A small delegation arrived, warriors and elders, their faces etched with worry that melted into profound relief when they saw their Alpha strong and whole. They bowed their heads to him, and then, to Cora's astonishment, they bowed their heads to her as well, a gesture of deep respect for the one who had saved their leader. Rylan never pressured her. He simply showed her his world. He introduced her to the members of his pack who came to visit, and she saw firsthand the loyalty and love they held for him. She saw the way he listened to his elders, the gentle way he spoke to the pups. This was not the brutal world of power she had feared. This was a family, a community, and he was its heart. One evening, as they stood watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and purple, Rylan took both of her hands in his. He turned to face her, his expression serious and full of love. "Cora," he began, his voice steady and sure. "My pack needs a strong leader. But a true leader needs more than just strength. He needs compassion. He needs a kind heart to balance his own. He needs a partner." He squeezed her hands gently. "I'm not asking you to leave your peace behind. I'm asking you to help me build that same peace for my people. Will you come back with me? Will you stand by my side, not as an Omega in the shadows but as my equal? As my mate?" Cora looked from his hopeful, earnest face out over the forest she loved. Her cabin had been a sanctuary, a hiding place. But with Rylan she had found something more, a purpose. A love that did not ask her to be less, but invited her to be more. She was not giving up her peace, she was taking it with her, to share it. A beautiful, radiant smile spread across her face. "Yes," she said, the word clear and sure. "My place is with you." The journey to the Shadow Ridge Pack lands was not an end, but a magnificent beginning. Cora did not arrive as a stranger, but as a legend, the quiet Omega who had saved their Alpha. And as she walked into the bustling, vibrant heart of the pack, her hand held firmly in Rylan's, she felt no fear, only a sense of belonging. She had found her home, not in a place but in a person, and in the new family that opened their arms to welcome her. Their story, which began with a knock in the night, was now a new legend for the pack, a tale of how strength and kindness found each other and became unstoppable. If you were swept away by the love story of Cora and Rylan, if you felt the thrill of their adventure and the warmth of their bond, then you won't want to miss what happens next. Their journey is just beginning. Subscribe to the channel to join their world. New chapters of romance, adventure, and magic are waiting to be discovered. A simple subscription is all it takes to ensure you never miss a moment of the story. We can't wait to continue this journey with you.